Hey everybody, this is Hot Rod Bob, and you've got gas, the morning edition, especially after that Thanksgiving dinner you had yesterday, but that's a whole different story, isn't it? For those of you in the U.S. anyway. Hey, thank you for tuning in. It is Friday. What day is this? I've lost track of time. It's been a crazy week. It's the only week I know that has 2 Fridays and 2 Mondays. You see, this is Friday B. We had Friday A on Wednesday because that was the day before a lot of people had off on Thursday, but that's a whole different story altogether, and we're back. This is GAAS, the Great American Auto Scene, the morning edition. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to do the full Monty for you. No, not that kind of full Monty. Come on now, you know me better than that. It's the Monte Carlo. The Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Yes, GAAS takes a look at one of the more popular Chevrolets of its time, and a car that made inroads into NASCAR and drag racing. Good morning, Jay Black. How are you doing this morning? As a matter of fact, it was the choice of NASCAR teams over Fords and Mopars, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. All right, the Monte Carlo was first introduced in 1970. It was Chevrolet's personal luxury car, and it was their version of the popular Grand Prix. Now, I know they didn't look anything alike, did they? But they did have a lot of shared componentry. The chassis, the way the body sat on the chassis, the engine set back so deeply. This thing had a long nose. Have you ever lifted the hood of one of these Monte Carlos? I mean, that is a king-size bed in itself. It is a long hood with a short deck, and it was quite popular back in the day. In 1970 and 72, the Monte Carlo was called the A Special platform, and it was shared with the Pontiac Grand Prix. It was part of the A-body intermediate class, but not quite the same. The engine was set back because of where the body was placed on the chassis. Good morning, Steve Ravitz. How are you doing today? Happy Thanksgiving to you. All right, so the Monte Carlo came out, and it was a personal luxury car from Chevrolet. It was something above the intermediate Malibus, but it was their top of the line because it was basically a luxury car from Chevrolet, but a personal luxury car in that it was only available as a sporty two-door. Now, I say sporty two-door because at the time, that's what it was. Johnny Martinez chiming in, said he had a 71 Monte Carlo, and he did a complete makeover. Everything was redone on that car, and it was a very popular car for customizers. That's right. It was very popular, and we can see it in later models. If you look at the lowrider movement of today, the Monte Carlo is a car of choice for many of the guys out there. But let's talk about the first generation. We'll start there. Now, development for the Monte Carlo started in 1968, and it was supposed to be a new upgraded platform for the Chevrolet line. They needed something to compete against the Pontiac Grand Prix, and compete, well, it did. It outsold the Pontiac Grand Prix. Now, in 1970, the first model came out, and it was filled with engine and transmission options like you've never seen before. Now, the base engine was a 350 cubic inch V8 two-barrel, meagerly 250 horsepower. Then remember, those were gross horsepower ratings. This is before the horsepower wars ended and the NA and the National Highway Traffic Administration put their feet into the mouths of all the car builders and changed things. All right, so let's take a look at this. Again, the first engine was the 350, 250 horsepower, two-barrel. It was a good engine. Solid, definitely enough to pull this car around, even though it was quite heavy. But there were options. There was the 4-barrel 350 at 300 horsepower. There was the 400 small block. Now, you got to remember, there were two 400s back in those days. It was rated at 265 horsepower. Then there was a 402 cubic inch big block. They called it a 400. It was actually a 396 bored out. They called it a 400 for who knows whatever reason. But it was a 402 cubic inch big block, 6.6 liter, 4-barrel with 330 horsepower. 330 horsepower, not enough for you? Guess what? There was an SS version available, and it came with the 454 big block. There we go. SS 454 package, a mere $420 option, but it gave you 360 horsepower. It also came with a heavy-duty suspension, wider tires, automatic leveling, rear suspension. I never knew that. Automatic leveling. Airbags? I don't see her anymore. That's another story altogether. It had stiffer suspension. It had better suspension. The only transmission available on the 454 was a turbo hydromatic, turbo 400 probably. And it was the only one available. Now, axle ratios, the standard one was a 306. You could get a 256 or a 331, but that was extra. Now, the 454 had the torque to pull them all. There were 3,823 of those built that year. This was a Chevrolet secret. Nobody thought about this. And I remember seeing them and thought they were quite plentiful here in Southern California, but the word just didn't get out. And the performance guys, the muscle car guys, weren't looking at Monte Carlos. They missed the mark. This was a great car, but they didn't think about it. So 1970 is when that car was introduced, and it was introduced with a lot of fanfare. Considered a coupe, it was stylish. It was, like I said, long-nosed, and it was neat. Selling these was not a problem. 71 saw some minor upgrades to the vehicle. They changed the grille emblem and things like that. Now, we're talking about the engines, and we talk about the net horsepower and the brake horsepower. And everyone complained that in 1970, horsepower has dropped. We haven't got the horsepower. Yeah, it was just rated differently, guys. Don't say you lost the horsepower. You lost the net number. You lost the gross number versus the net. And I'll give you a clue. All right. The gross number on the 350 two-barrel in 1971 was 245 horsepower. Not bad, considering that's what my Corvette has got. And that's the net rating for the fuel-injected 350s. Now, horsepower did come down with emissions changing, and the Corvette's an example of that. But in this 1971 listing, the Turbofire 350 two-barrel was rated at a gross horsepower of 245, or brake horsepower as we knew it. The net horsepower was 165, and that is what people remembered. Oh, the horsepower is down. I only have 165 horsepower. You only had 165 horsepower. It's net, with the accessories on the vehicle, on the engine. What horsepower does the engine have after everything's put on? The air conditioning, the alternator, the water pump, things of that nature that draw horsepower from the engine to run. All right, the 354 barrel is rated at 270 horsepower now. Okay, it is down a little bit. They lowered compression to meet emissions. But the net is what everyone remembers, and that was 175. Where'd that 95 horsepower go? It's what it takes to run the accessories. That's right, and Corey's telling me the long-nose water pump, the fan shroud looked like a half trash can. Yeah, it did, because the engine sat so far back that it was like that. Nicole Pratt's watching us this morning, and she's saying hi to Johnny Martinez, our pinstripe expert. All right, now the 400. The big block is still there. The small block is gone. 4-barrel, 300 horsepower, 260 horsepower net. Now, we talked about the 454, the SS. 365 brake horsepower. Net was only 285. Again, we really didn't lose any horsepower. It's just how it's written. Excuse me. Oh, allergies are wonderful. All right, so the SS 454 package was discontinued after 1971. And the reason given, well, actually, through 1975, the 454 was still available. But the SS was dropped. And the reason General Motors said this was they indicated that the Monte Carlo was not considered a muscle car. It was a personal luxury vehicle. It was a statement vehicle. People looking for high-performance cars were not buying the Monte Carlo unless they knew what they were looking for, and they really got it. But the SS nameplate was dropped, and it was brought back 12 years later when they tried to give the Monte Carlo a more sporty image. And it was doing quite well at NASCAR at the time, so it kind of worked. All right, 1972, there were some minor changes again. Still got the 350s, two of them, 2-barrel and 4-barrel. The 402 big block, that was a 400. Now it's a 402. They're finally stepping up to the correct size of that motor, was 240 horsepower. Again, these are net numbers. And the 454, 270. Still available. Now, in California, which had the emission standards before the federal standards went in, the 4-barrel 350 was standard and the only engine available with a automatic transmission. They're all automatics, but that was it. In 72, the 4-speed manual transmission was discontinued, but you know the standard transmission on a Monte Carlo? A 3-speed column shift. Didn't see many of those, if any, but they did have them. It was dropped later on because, no one knew what it was. No one in their right mind would buy a 3-speed column shift for a luxury vehicle. It just didn't work. They dropped it. In 73, a complete redesign of the Monte Carlo happened. Now it's on the more intermediate chassis. It's still got that long nose, but not quite as long. And now they're considering it a pillared coupe. Why a pillared coupe? It had a little opera window behind the driver's door and passenger door. That window did not come down, and there was a bar or a piece of steel that finished the roof. So now they're calling it a pillared coupe. Right, Mark McGeorge? How you doing there? I know I'm going to get on it in just a little bit. All right, for 73, the new Monte Carlo Landau, which is basically the S with a little half vinyl roof in the back. And they got some other things, including, well, swivel bucket seats. How about that? Swivels. Woo-hoo. You get to slide sideways coming out of the vehicle. And in 1973, the Monte Carlo was named Car of the Year by Motor Trend magazine. And they liked the styling, they liked the handling. Things were added to the vehicle to make it better. Sway bars, heavy-duty suspension, all the things that were on the SS are now on the basic Monte Carlo. Now, still, manual transmission was standard. And when you got the standard one, you got bias-ply tires. If you got the upgraded vehicle above the standard Monte Carlo, you got radial tires. Interesting. 3-speed manual was still there in 1974 with a 350 V8. So again, no economy versions of the Monte Carlo were out, but you could still get a 3-speed manual transmission. Why, I have no idea, and neither did the buying public because it was dropped shortly after this. In 1975, the Monte Carlo got some minor upgrades, nothing really spectacular, little grille movement. The 454 was no longer offered in California cars. So if you find a 1975 Monte Carlo with a 454, it was not a California car. It was a 49 state vehicle. Now, the base 352 barrel, still rated at 145 horsepower in 49 states. The 4-barrel was the one available in California. You couldn't get a 2-barrel 350. So again, 1974, you find a Monte Carlo 2-barrel 350. It is not a California spec vehicle. Now, what does that mean out of the tailpipe? Not much. It just was the testing procedures. Monte Carlo's got the turbo hydromatic transmission. The Power Glide was now gone. It was available in the first couple of years. 76, it got stacked headlights. Horsepower is down again now because emissions are really taking hold. Still the net reading. 305 V8 is now the base engine, and it's rated at 140 horsepower with a 2-barrel. The 350 was rated at 145 horsepower with a 2-barrel and 175 with a 4-barrel. The 400 cubic inch V8 was optional, and this one is the small block. There was the 400 big block, and the 454 was discontinued completely for 1976. 77, some minor revisions again, nothing really changed. 350 still standard in California. The 305 2-barrel and was available. The 350 now rated at 170 horsepower. The 400 was dropped, no longer available. The third generation Monte Carlo comes out. Now this is a smaller car. This was part of the downsizing of the mid-size cars based on the issues from the Arab oil embargo. They needed some extra room there for better fuel mileage. The Monte Carlo went on a diet, lost about 800 pounds by shrinking the body style, and in my estimation, made it a good-looking car too. So it was out there, and it was doing good, and it was selling well as well. 350 was still available, but now there were two six-cylinders. First time for the Monte Carlo. V6s. There was a 200 cubic inch Chevrolet built V6 as standard in 49 states. But in California, they got the 231 cubic inch Buick V6. Yeah, California, the standard, the base engine, the Buick 231 V6. Not a bad engine at all. But Chevrolet started messing around with engine sizes for people that wanted a V8. They still wanted something that got a little bit better fuel mileage. Chevy came up with a 267 cubic inch V8. See what? And a 350 or 305. No more was a 350 available. The 305 and a 267. Oddball Chevy small block. So oddball that people don't even remember it existed. Now, one of the things that happened, though, in 1980 was some minor body changes, some upgraded exterior pieces. The metric 200-inch 3-speed automatic transmission became standard on the 229 cubic inch Chevrolet built V6 with a 2-barrel carburetor. Okay. The Buick V6, now still standard for California cars. The Chevrolet V6 was not in the Monte Carlo for California cars. With that, though, Chevrolet was also able to introduce the turbocharged Buick V6 into the Monte Carlo, and it was one of those best-kept secrets. Nobody knew about it. Here's the Grand National with all this horsepower from a V6 and a turbo. The Chevy got the same engine combination, and nobody noticed. They just didn't push it. It didn't last very long either. There were 13,000 turbo Monte Carlos made in 1980. How many have you seen? I've only seen one or two, and the only reason I knew it was because it had a little bump scoop in the hood, and it said turbocharged 3.8. Okay. Fourth generation Monte Carlo, 1981 to 84. Here's the Monte Carlo getting big again, but it is also becoming more popular for NASCAR. Now, Chevy, Ford, and Chrysler all had these Persuado bans on factory-supported racing. But Ford and Chrysler continued theirs while Chevrolet kind of backdoored their program to help racers, and the NASCAR guys flocked to the Monte Carlo. It was the car of choice. I remember meeting Richard Petty back in 1970 or 82. Yeah, about 1982, 83. And he had dropped Mopar and was driving a Monte Carlo. That was his start, his switch to Generous Motors. It was a good switch for him. He did well. I can remember standing on the inside of turn 6 at Riverside Raceway and watching the King come around the corner, inside front wheel off the ground, almost a foot. That car was glued to the track, but it was a stiff suspension and chassis, and that thing handled great. He had engine problems. They didn't get used to the Chevy engines for a while, but once he got that straightened out, Richard Petty was still the king, and he showed it. Good morning, Neil Panks. How are you doing this morning? All right, so now the new Buick-powered Monte Carlo hits the streets. 305 Chevy V8 is the standard engine. Turbocharged Buick with 170 horsepower. It's there. Only 327 Monte Carlos were built in 1981 with turbos. Still a little bit better than Buick Grand National, but still something that went unnoticed. Chevrolet came out with a new V6 with 260 cubic inches and used the Oldsmobile 350 V8. Both of these were diesels. Have you seen a Monte Carlo with a diesel engine? They were out there. They didn't go over real well, and they did discontinue them. 83 saw some minor revisions. Then the Monte Carlo SS with the sloped nose came out. NASCAR guys loved it. This was great. Now, in 1985 to 88, the T-Tops came out. But they also came out with this special 1986 model for the NASCAR guys. And I can remember seeing this thing and thought it was gorgeous. It was the 86 Monte Carlo Aero Coupe. Not a notchback anymore. This had a fastback rear window. It aided the guys in NASCAR, and they made it for the street. It was beautiful. This is one of my bucket list cars. Love to have one of them. In '87, Chevrolet eliminated the Sport Coupe version of the Monte Carlo, leaving the SS and the LS and the Aero Coupe only. The Super Sport incorporated the smooth rear bumper and tail lamps, first introduced in 1986. The Aero Coupe made up 6,000 sales of the total 39,000 for the Super Sports. So they were not really plentiful, but they're still cool. Now, in 1995, it became part of the Lumina chassis. Remember the Lumina? Yeah, unremarkable. Front-wheel drive. Boring, but that's what it became. It was still somewhat aerodynamic, and the NASCAR guys did make them rear drive. NASCAR did allow that, but it was still boring and kind of a travesty based on the history of the Monte Carlo. The Monte Carlo stayed a production front-wheel drive vehicle, but never regained its popularity. Now, in 2000 to 2005, Chevrolet they gave the Monte Carlo a new facelift, a new body, new design, and GM Motorsports got involved and added some cool looks to the Monte Carlo, and it became a decent car, even available with a supercharged V6 engine. It had a V8 engine as well. The supercharged SS was available from 2004 and 2005. A naturally aspirated SS continued on after that and was relabeled the LT for 2005. A slight facelift on them. They were pretty good. The base engine, 3.5 V6, 211 horsepower. Now we're getting the horsepower back up again. Hi, Willie Hofer. How are you doing this morning? So the Monte Carlo stayed around. 2006, 2007, Monte Carlo got its SS back and the stripes. A little bit of a semi-fastback, a little spoiler in the back. Wasn't too bad. The LT and the LTZ models were available with a 3.9-liter engine, and the LTZ model was dropped along with the engine for the Flex Fuel 3.5. Okay, still an image vehicle for Chevrolet, and they had a special Dale Earnhardt Signature Edition in 2001 called the Intimidator. I've got a friend that's got one of those. 2003, Jeff Gordon Edition was released. In 2004, the Dale Jr. Edition came out. Now, there were also pace car editions, as NASCAR had some Monte Carlo pace cars out during the day, 2000, 2001, 2002, and 2003. There were less than 2,000 of these produced. 2000 had the highest year, 2,200. But in 2001, 2002, and 2003, there were less than 1,500 each of those. Now, the engine options, well, they're kind of interesting. Front-wheel drive, again, no rear-wheel drives. Hi, sweetheart. My wife's watching right now. LS from 2000 to 2005 with 180 horsepower. SS and LT with 200 horsepower. The supercharged 2004 and 5 was rated at 240 horsepower. There was the LS, LT with the 211 horsepower V6. The LT, the LTZ, the 242 horsepower, and in 2006 and 2007, the SS Monte Carlo front-wheel drive had an LS4 V8 and front-wheel drive, 303 horsepower. Now, production, well, that front-wheel drive units produced nearly 422,000. SS's, a mere 14,000. The Monte Carlo was discontinued in 2007, never to return. Well, maybe it will someday, but not in the car that we are used to. NASCAR guys loved the Monte Carlos, and they ran them until NASCAR wouldn't allow them any longer. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got the full Monte, the Monte Carlo, that is, on GAAS, the Great American Auto Scene, brought to you by Service Tech Equipment in Simi Valley, California. Service Tech with all the equipment you need for the shop you've got to work on your cars. Contact Craig Heidenthal there at Service Tech Equipment. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got gas, the morning edition. Hey, the big swag is watching us right now. Brett Wagner, how you doing? He says he loves his Honda Element. Yep, I don't think you'll see one of those on a NASCAR track very often, but they're there. And Debbie Bradshaw is watching as well. Brett Wagner, thanks for tuning in. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got gas, the morning edition. And if you missed it in its entirety today, don't worry about it. It'll be on YouTube, Anchor FM, iTunes, and more later on this afternoon. You guys have a great day. I'm Hot Rod Bob, and you've got gas. Thanks for being a gasaholic.